Hello, I'm CJ Werleman, and in this week's episode, we reveal how fast-changing realities are forcing Israeli Jews to flee the Zionist state forever. But first, a quick reminder to like and subscribe to our show. Now let's get into it. Israel has failed to achieve any of its stated objectives in Gaza. It has not destroyed Hamas or other Palestinian resistance groups, and nor has it freed its remaining hostages. But even worse for the Zionist state, it not only stares down a war on all fronts, but also it has unintentionally united the Arab world against it, as illustrated by this stunning development last week, in which the Arab League removed Hezbollah from its classification of terrorist organizations, a classification that both it and the Gulf Cooperation Council gave to Hezbollah in 2016, when it accused the group of inciting sectarian violence in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. This reclassification is Israel's worst nightmare coming to bear, because this is the collapse of its divide and rule strategy in the Middle East. Hamas set the trap for Israel, and Israel swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Its relentless and merciless genocide in Gaza has caused so much anger and humiliation in the Arab world that it is bearing the deep divides which emerged after the Arab Spring. This sudden turn of events threatens the very survival of the Jewish state, with ordinary Israeli citizens coming face to face with reality. The realization that Israel's colonial enterprise is on the brink of collapse. They aren't stupid. They see what's happening, which is why they are now fleeing the country in record numbers, with a new report showing that more than 500,000 have fled without plans for returning. This number is expected to double and even quadruple to 2 million Israelis fleeing the country within coming weeks, as conflict against Hezbollah escalates along Israel's northern border. That 2 million from a total population of 7 million are planning to leave is the sum total of every Zionist's worst nightmare. But the message to Zionist Jews from the entire Middle East is this: don't let the door smack you on the ass on the way out. And yes, that sounds like unnecessary gloating, but it's important to understand that Israelis have only their government to blame, because this trend began well before October 7th, with a July 2023 survey finding that 28% had plans of leaving Israel out of fears that the country was headed towards civil war and violence due to internal political schisms.
If the situation will be so bad, it's worsening every day, we will find a place to live outside Israel. We all have European passports.
And others also think of emigrating, as hardline ministers push through highly controversial laws that would weaken oversight of the government by the courts.
Unfortunately, many of my friends check their options in other countries.
I will not raise my kids in a country which is not democratic.
Today, Israelis are getting a taste of their own medicine, and by all accounts, they don't like it. And because the Middle East is not their native home, they are grabbing their American or European passports and heading quickly for the exits, telling a waiting journalist how terrifying it has become to illegally occupy another people's land.
I just had the worst experience of my life. I was in Florentine and I heard the rockets go off and my whole life changed.
This underscores the point that Palestinians have been yelling at the top of their voices for years, that Jewish settlers have the luxury of running to their countries of origin when times get tough, whereas Palestinians have nowhere else to go. This is their land, their indigenous homeland, and therefore they will defend it to the very last man, woman and child, even when faced with genocide. The people of Gaza are going nowhere. Israel, on the other hand, is now faced with a massive shortfall of soldiers. It needs 10,000 new recruits immediately, which is why the Israeli Supreme Court ruled last week that ultra-Orthodox Jews must be subject to the military draft, after decades of being exempt from military service. Now watch how Israeli forces treated those who protested the ruling. This is the manifestation of Zionist desperation. This is Israel on the verge of collapse. This is like watching the dying days of Nazi Germany when it forced young boys and old men to fight against the advancing Allied forces. Israel is done. It simply cannot cope with multiple wars on multiple fronts, while its young men and women dodge military conscription by taking extended vacations with their families in New York, London, and Paris. This is a lesson that Russia has learnt during its occupation of Ukraine. Its men don't wish to die defending stolen land, which is why millions of Russians of military age are vacationing in Asia, forcing Putin to send jailed criminals to the front lines. Which begs the question, What Jew in their right mind would want to move to Israel and fight for the Zionist army, given Israel is the most dangerous place in the world for Jews, and given Israeli soldiers are ordered to shoot their comrades in the back to prevent them from being taken captive? Israel's military recruitment crisis has been brewing for some time.
It's a rite of passage in Israeli society. When you turn 18, you serve mandatory military service. 2 years for women, nearly 3 for men. But for some young Jewish Israelis, something is changing.
When you think of Israel's military in one word, what do you think?
3 words, wrong side of history.
What about you?
Apartheid.
These teenagers are burning their draft letters, part of an unprecedented movement to refuse to join the army. For many, one of Israel's most cherished public institutions.
Our society is violent because everyone is holding a weapon.
Making matters worse for ordinary Israelis is the country's rapidly deteriorating economy. The currency is in freefall, tourism has dried up, the housing market has crashed, and gross domestic production has plummeted nearly 20%. The only metric that has improved is the unemployment rate. But this is because so many have quit their jobs, packed up their belongings, and fled the country, a reality that's seen more than 1 in 3 won't be able to fight. You come to understand why upwards of 2 million Jewish settlers plan to self-deport from Israel within the coming weeks and months. You might call this karmic or godly justice. Others might call it a new biblical exodus. But I liken the mass exodus of Jewish migrants from Palestinian land to a reverse Nakba. In other words, realities on the ground are encouraging Jewish migrants to leave, therefore invoking memories of how these same Jewish migrants forcibly expelled nearly 1 million Palestinians from their homes in 1948 to pave the way for a Jewish supremacist state. The irony couldn't be made starker, and karma is a bitter pill to swallow. I hope these fleeing Israelis take this lesson from history. I hope they take this moment to understand that their phony country is built on stolen land and constructed on killing, displacing, and dispossessing the indigenous Palestinian population. I hope they remember how this campaign of ethnic cleansing began in the 1920s, when newly arrived Jewish migrants formed themselves into terrorist groups like the Haganah, Stern Gang, and Ergun to terrorize native Palestinians and pressure the British forces into leaving Palestine. An effort that culminated in the bombing of Jerusalem's King David Hotel in 1946, which killed 96 British soldiers and diplomats. This is when the British media rightly called Jewish settlers terrorists, because terrorism is how Israel was created.
The King David Hotel itself. It was in the wing on the right of the picture that the terrorists placed their explosive. And the result of the crime, the tragic scene, is like a serious incident during the Blitz. The hotel housed the British Army headquarters and the Palestine government offices, and casualties were very heavy. 65 deaths are reported, and there is little or no hope of survival for any of the 58 missing. Nearly 50 others were injured. The Jewish terrorist organization, Irgun Tzvai Leumi, openly admitted responsibility for the bombing.
These are indeed the final, dying days of the Zionist state. In trying to destroy the Palestinian people, Israel has only succeeded in destroying itself. Its military has been exposed as weak, ineffective, and uncommitted. Global opinion has turned sharply in favor of the Palestinians, and the Arab world is now uniting against the Zionist state. And on top of all of that, declining numbers of Jews are committed to defending the Zionist state to its inevitable end. This, however, doesn't mean there won't be many more dark days ahead. Israel will become more vicious and even more violent as it becomes ever more isolated, surrounded, and desperate. There's still more work to be done, but we will be here to report and counter every one of its atrocities, abuses, and lies. But that's my time for today. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we kindly ask you please support our effort to expose and confront injustices in the Muslim world by becoming a member of this show at patreon.com/CJ Wellerman. We can't produce, sustain and grow this show without your help, and we offer exclusive content and benefits to those who do. But for now, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and stay blessed.